Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Cadden. I'm General Manager of at Mito Foundation. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's Meet the Experts series. And as we enter this discussion with Dr. Drago Bratkovic, just a couple of introductory things. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our lands, and I'm joining this event today from the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I acknowledge anyone who is joining us that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today, and acknowledge where you're joining from us all over Australia. I also acknowledge anyone joining us with lived or living experience with Mito, and those who care and love for them. We really value as an organisation the generous contribution of many Mito community members, helps us understand what's really important and really helps us to guide the work that we do. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions for Mito Foundation, please reach out to our helpline. You'll get some links as well in the chat. We're happy to follow up on anything after this discussion. And to the main event, I'd like to introduce our guest today, our Meet the Expert expert. So Dr. Drago Bratkovic is a clinician scientist and head of the metabolic unit at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide, where he's been for 13 years. He has research interests in the investigation and management of inborn errors of metabolism and development of protocols for the clinical follow-up of positive newborn screening, and has been involved in the clinical follow-up for 19 years. Reason why we've invited Dr. Bratkovic today is because of his passion for research, and we're keen to discuss his insights into Mito research, what's happening, what's been happening, and what we can expect in the future that might have real outcomes for Mito therapeutics. So welcome, Drago.
Thank you, Tony.
Excellent. So we do have some questions and we'll get into those. As a reminder, please use the Q&A if you'd like to ask a question throughout today's session. So Drago, some big questions for you. What are some of the biggest advancements you've seen in Mito management and treatment in your time working in the field of Mito?
Well, it's a really broad question. I might kind of talk a little bit about in terms of the management side of things. Actually, probably the diagnostics, I think, has probably been the biggest change over the last whole of the years that I've been working in the field, actually. And I think the experience that patients and families have now being diagnosed with Mito disease is vastly different from what it was 10 years ago. I remember when I started my training, majority of patients with Mito, it was pretty much a clinical diagnosis with some biochemistry to back it up, but not much else. And we didn't actually have genetic diagnosis in the vast majority of patients. And so that kind of left us in a kind of difficult position for prenatal testing and other things, particularly for those that we kind of were suspecting were nuclear and we couldn't find the gene that was nuclear. And so that was a 1 in 4 chance for those families having a child with a Mito disorder. So the ability to find those and kind of, people call them solve them, but find the gene changes in those families has been really, really kind of helpful. And it's allowed families to have other children without the fear of having a child with a mitochondrial disorder. The mitochondrial DNA diagnostic side of things has improved a lot as well. Before, we just had a panel of kind of 4 mitochondrial DNA changes that you could test for, and that was about it. So if you had another mitochondrial DNA change somewhere else in the mitochondrial DNA, you just couldn't test for it. We were fortunate in Adelaide, actually, one of our laboratories was able to sequence probably about 60 to 70% of the mitochondrial DNA due to kind of ways that we were doing it. And that was quite helpful for us locally, but it still wasn't the whole DNA. But now we can do that as part of a genome. And at the moment, Victoria, BCGS is probably one of the few laboratories that does the mitochondrial DNA sequencing, which is great. But I think that's going to open up soon to other laboratories around the country. So that will improve access for people to have that. And that kind of leads, I guess, into the MBS benefit schedule item number now for mitochondrial testing. I think that's been a huge development for equity in getting access to testing. I think a lot of families, if they went through the wrong specialist who didn't know how to access testing or didn't know the right people to talk to or the right laboratory to send samples to, they were really disadvantaged in that regard. So that has really opened up a lot. And there was a lot of variability across the country, taking that a little bit further in terms of some hospitals wouldn't pay for genetic testing whilst other hospitals would. And so you really had this, I think people have used the term postcode lottery a few times in different aspects of healthcare, but it was very much a postcode lottery depending on which state you're in, which hospital you went to, as to what diagnostic tests you could actually access. So I think that's been massive. The diagnostic process has also, the speed at which it happens now is a lot greater. In the old days, you would try and find a laboratory that could test for your particular gene. You'd send it away. It would probably take months. Then if you're unlucky and it wasn't that gene, you'd have to go looking for another gene or find another laboratory to do that testing for you. But now with exomes and genomes and the massively parallel sequencing that we have available to us, it's really, really easy. And we've been fortunate in Adelaide. We've got a really good relationship with our genetic testing laboratory. And if we have a baby that presents with what we think might be mito, so a really sick baby with a high lactate, really unwell, lots of clinical issues, if I can get it onto a run on a Monday, I can sometimes get a result by the Friday. And, you don't find results in all of the cases, but, in a lot of those cases, that can provide a lot of certainty for a family with a sick child in an ICU setting or an NICU setting. And that's been really, really helpful. I can probably list about 5 or 6 cases where it has really helped us talk with the family, discuss what the next step should be. And then they had that follow-on benefit for the families down the track in terms of prenatal testing and having further children. So I think in terms of mito management, I've seen the biggest benefits in the diagnostic side. Now, in terms of general mito management, I think the work that the Mito Foundation, doing a bit of a plug for you guys through this, but I think the advocacy that the Mito Foundation has been doing, I hope we're going to start seeing some benefits in terms of knowledge in the community or general knowledge in the medical community about mito disease and making sure that we're doing the best for the patients, trying to get some more mito multidisciplinary clinics going around the country would be great. And so those things are going to be really important. Some of the support you've got, I think you've got some physios on board now as well with the Mito Foundation providing advice to families. All of those things are really positive, and hopefully that kind of levels the playing field in terms of access to different therapies. And with that, I guess the NDIS kind of moving into that, I think that coming through has been really helpful for a lot of families. It's still a struggle. I'm not saying it's easy to get your therapies funded and accessed through NDIS, but what it's meant is that there's no longer, again, another postcode lottery where your access to therapies was really dependent upon where you were in the country and what services were available through either your hospital or community services. And so that's been really good. So I guess I saw it quite interestingly in South Australia with NDIS because we were the pilot site for the NDIS, and they started off with babies and worked their way up through the age group. And we just saw this kind of incredible improvement with the support therapies and access to equipment that happened as a result of that. As the NDIS got busier, as they opened it up more, that changed, of course. But in that initial couple of years, it was like, oh my God, it was like a light shining from heaven. It was amazing. But it has changed a lot for families, improved things. Sorry, my cat's going to come and say hello. She will not be denied. So I guess it's all those kind of support things around that. In terms of specific mito treatments and management, I think not much has really changed, I'll be honest, in the last 15 years. I'm still using the same vitamin cocktail I did back in the day with a few new improvements. I think taurine, we're kind of using that a little bit more with the MELAS patients, using more arginine, putting patients on arginine emergency protocols is something that's really come along in the last few years, at least in terms of what we've been doing. Trying to get that multi-D approach has been challenging because of local funding of medical services in the hospitals, but that's something that we can kind of work on. It's not insoluble, but we can we'll get there eventually. And so in terms of treatments, not a lot. And I guess if we want to, as we go through the Q&A, I'm sure people have some other questions. I've seen a lot of promising therapies come up for trial and unfortunately fail the kind of phase 2, phase 3 study hurdle. I've just been reviewing them this morning, and it's a little bit depressing actually, but still the thing that's not depressing is that companies are still willing to give it a shot and still trying new therapies and trying new approaches. And that's what I take heart from, and that eventually we'll find a few things that will actually make a big difference to people and families. But I think it's still some time coming, but we'll see how we go. Very long-winded answer to the first question, but Tony, if there's anything else you want me to talk about that.
Thank you, Drago. And it was a broad question. You gave a broad answer. I think, yes, really important to acknowledge how much has changed in the diagnostic space and how people seeking a diagnosis can get that much faster, cheaper, easier, and how that can really positively impact what has been often an enormous diagnostic odyssey for many, many families. So I think thank you. That's really positive. And then, yes, I agree with you around management, where we're getting much better at being able to provide access to different broader. We have a much better idea of what helps people in managing Mito day to day and having access to things like physios and other broader allied health and alongside healthcare. And the NDS we could talk about for a long time. We're not going to talk about it today, but we could. We've just come out of the biannual AussieMet Scientific Conference. So I was in Melbourne the week before last. Drago, I know you were there. We saw you there. What were some of the things that really stuck in your mind as some things to get excited about?
Yeah, look, I was only there for the Clinicians Day, which was on the Friday, and there was a lot of really good basic sciences that happened the previous few days, which I was really disappointed I couldn't get to. So I can't answer the question in terms of the basic science stuff. But you know, that's where I think, you know, the new therapies are going to come from in 4 or 5 years' time, is that basic sciences these days. I guess on the Clinicians Day, it was what I felt was a really positive feeling about managing Mito across the country. I think, you know, it was really good to see the work being done in Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, LHON, and how we're getting a better idea of the numbers of patients around the country and trying to, I think, hopefully be able to try and coordinate something a bit more nationally. That's where I kind of took away from that. I took away a lot from the fact that we've got some other registries. We've got the Lees disease registry coming along. The Mito Hope project, I think we got an update on that from Professor Christodoulou and a few others. I think that's really promising. It's coming along, albeit slowly. I don't think any of the delays that we're experiencing with the Mito Hope project are unexpected. I think it's probably a little bit behind where everyone would like it to be, but that's always going to be the case. But they're working hard on that, and I think they're looking, from what I remember from the day, looking towards the end of 2025 to maybe start to begin the recruitment process for families. The disappointing part about what's happening internationally about that is the lack of information coming out of the UK from their similar project to the Mito Hope, the mitochondrial donation stuff they've been doing there. And I think we would all love to see some outcomes from that and what that looks like, because that will generally really powerfully inform what we're going to do here in Australia. So Mito Hope was amazing. I think the Lees disease registry, I think, is a good example of us coming together and trying to get some more information about our Mito patients and get some more collaboration going on there. I think we had a really good discussion about clinical trials and registries and things. I think that's something that the Mito Foundation is really strong on, and it's good to see that, you know, we're going to be probably talking about that during this session as well, about registries and what to do there. In terms of actual new therapies, there was a lovely presentation from Murray Aberson from Precision Therapeutics about a trial that they're hoping to start in the middle of next year, I believe, which is going to be targeting mitochondrial MILAS mutation, the 3243 A to G mutation. And what they're planning to do with their therapeutic is what their therapeutic will do is actually destroy the mutant mitochondrial DNA, therefore shifting heteroplasmy in a positive direction. That's the idea. But they're targeting mostly muscle in their particular product. But it was really good to see that work coming to a clinical trial phase. But also, for me, it was very exciting to have a chat with him personally to see if we could get some of these trials happening in Australia. And it sounded like he was very keen for that to be the case. So I think we've put ourselves in the driving seat for potentially getting a study like that here in Australia, which would be amazing. It is a gene therapy study. That's the gene therapy is used to deliver the enzyme that targets the abnormal mitochondrial DNA. But we've got experience with doing gene therapy using this particular vector in Adelaide and in other centres around the country. So I think it looks promising that we could potentially get that study here in Australia, which would be amazing for the mito community, given that MILAS is the biggest patient group and could probably have the biggest impact, I think, if this therapeutic was actually successful. So I haven't seen their preclinical work. I haven't got a non-disclosure agreement with them yet, but that will be coming. But even if I do see it, I can't say anything about it. But he seemed to be very excited about it. And I think it's great to see that level of excitement regarding a new therapy like this. I'm trying to think what else was presented there. I think there was a lot of really good presentations from families and people living with mito. And I think sharing those stories are really important. I think it's good to keep that coming. And it probably needs to be out there in a broader audience, which the Mito Foundation is doing all the time, trying to get that message out as much as possible. So, yeah. For me, it was good to hear those lived experiences as well. I hear it from day to day from patients, but also hearing it from other patients around the country is really good too.
Yeah, thank you. There is definitely some exciting stuff happening. And as you mentioned, Mito Foundation is advocating for bringing more clinical trials to Australia, something we're really prioritising. And that was part of bringing everyone together as part of the clinical data, as part of that, and having Research Australia there and having the biopharmaceutical there as well. What are you seeing that is happening in Australia that will increase the likelihood of Australian-based trials?
I've kind of touched on the registries. I think that's a really good place to start. I mean, most clinics know where all their mito patients are, particularly the pediatric clinics. But for the adult clinics, I think it's a different story. A lot of mito patients adult patients with mito disease are kind of dispersed amongst a couple of different clinician groups. And that's mostly kind of neurologists, sometimes hematologists, and other groups. But, you know, I think for going forward for the future, trying to get the adult population, which is the population that a lot of these trials are going to target. You know, if you look at all the trials that are happening, they're all in patients over 18 years of age. We need to get a better idea of that patient group and get them into a registry and get them in so we know where they are and who they are. Because the individual hospitals and clinical centres that do that are probably not capturing them all as well as they could, and that's not their own fault. I think it's just for lack of funding for a lot of centres to be able to chase families or chase people down, or maybe not have that visibility in their own state for other people to refer to them. I guess in my state of South Australia, it's a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit more manageable. And so in terms of the paediatric population, we've got pretty much 100% capture of all the patients in South Australia. But for the adult side of things, it's a bit more hit and miss. I think there are a lot of patients that still haven't been engaged with a service like ours. But, you know, I think with a registry and working with registries and the hospitals as well and directing people to the right places through, you know, work that Mito Foundation does, I think would be really helpful to do that. So knowing the population, where the patients are, what they've got, I think is useful, and be able to present that or have that data available to the trial companies when they're ready to go is really important. Making sure that patients are aware of what clinical trials are, what their responsibilities are, so they're not either scared or get scared when they start to go through the process. And I think I gave a talk a couple of years ago in Adelaide just about the clinical trial process. And when I started doing the talk, you realise how much goes into it and how complex it is and all the different players in it and who does what and what's your role, what's your responsibility, what are your rights, and making sure that people know those things. I think that means you've got a good population of people who are trial ready, who know what it's all about. And so when they go into it, it's not scary, so that when you get through, you sign the consent form, we don't have people pulling out because they weren't really fully aware of what the responsibilities were going to be. And so I think getting the population ready, trial ready, is really important. I guess then we can kind of move on to the clinical trial sites, making sure they're ready for action. And I've been fortunate, we've got a great team in Adelaide for my adult trials who will just pick up a trial and run with it, regardless of what disease it is and what it is. And what we've found is that I think it's all about having a pre-setup, having a team that's ready to go is really important. And that means sometimes sharing that team with other units and other studies. Trying to start up a clinical trial team from scratch to run one study is really hard, because you've got to find a clinical trial coordinator, you've got to find the other nurses and other specialists to help you with that. And you're building basically a whole department from scratch, really, if you want to look at it that way. And these trials are quite intensive. They're not like, take a couple of tablets, maybe come in for a visit once a couple of months. These are really intensive trials where you're doing walk tests and muscle strength testing. And in some situations, you might have to do muscle biopsies and other more invasive things. So it's really hard to suddenly create a trial study group like that from scratch. So it's important to have those idea where those study groups are and how ready they are for these studies, and then making sure they're ready for the types of studies that are coming. So, for example, the precision one's going to be AAV9 gene therapy. What teams have done those studies, use that particular vector, are familiar with handling that, familiar with all the regulations around gene therapy. So, making sure you've got that team ready to go somewhere around the country, and knowing where they are, and if they're ready to, if they're actually capable of taking on those studies. Yeah. So there's lots of things that, are kind of happening, but probably still need to happen, I guess. And as time goes on and more studies come through, then more study trial groups will become more familiar with MITO and what MITO trials look like, and therefore would be happy to take them on.
Thanks, Drago. Again, really comprehensive. And I think you've probably answered somewhat the question we've got about registries. You've talked about how important they are, so that you know where people are and how relevant a trial might be for somebody. MITO Foundation has a registry. It has served a purpose of being a conduit to lots of different types of research. What would you say to somebody who's saying, should I join a registry? Why join a registry?
Yeah, look, I guess I've kind of touched on it, like you said, through my other answers earlier on. I think there's a couple of things. Personally, the personal benefit would be that you are there on a registry that's going to be accessed by clinical trial people to see where studies are going to be run, and you might get yourself onto a trial by doing that. Okay. The second thing is you advantage the whole community as well by adding your data point to that, making sure that you add your number to the numbers that we've got in Australia, so it makes the country more attractive for a clinical trial. If they come to us and say, how many patients with MELAS have you got? We can say, with some accuracy, we've got X number of patients. If you didn't have your name in there, well, that would be one less than the number we're going to give to them, and that might make the difference between whether a study goes ahead or not. So you advantage yourself, you advantage everyone else, and then also, I think it also helps for clinical management across the country, so we know where all the patients are and where we need to focus our attention. So if we find we've got a big pocket of patients in Perth that are not being looked after, then hey, let's do some work there. Let's try and get some more clinical stuff going on there as well. So it's not just clinical trial stuff; it can inform lots of different things. And also in terms of, it gives us a starting point for natural history studies and other things that we can do as investigator-led studies that we can do at a local level that are not clinical trial related. So there are so many benefits for a good run registry. And this is where I'm going to put my kind of views on registries. And I personally believe very strongly, and I'm glad to see the Mito Foundation doing this, that registries need to be owned by the patient groups that then are accessed by clinicians like ourselves and other people. But it needs to be held by and run by a patient organisation. I've seen so many registries that have been put up by companies, even though they run great clinical trials, in terms of registries, they very closed off, and the data ends up being locked away somewhere where no one can access it. I do feel strongly that patient organisations need to run those registries, own those registries, and the patients need to own that registry as well. That's your data. You need to be able to access that data whenever you want. And so having a patient portal as part of any registry is really important. So you can go in there, you can access it, you can put more data in if you want to, you can take data out, it's yours. And so you're contributing and you've got control over that. That's kind of my viewpoint on registries. And it's really great to see Mito Foundation doing a lot of that work. And I think that's great. So yeah, get in there, get your name in there, get your patient details in there. But not only for the Mito registry, but also making sure you're known to your local mitochondrial specialist service so they can actually run better too. Yeah.
Agreed. I think a multi-pronged approach is going to be the best. I agree on our Mito registry, Mito Foundation's Mito registry is available to anyone that has somebody's mentioned it could be mitochondrial disease right through to a confirmed genetic diagnosis and everything in between. So just a little plug, and we'll put it in the chat as well, but please check it out if you're not on it already. We are reviewing how we might want to expand it or adapt it to be as effective as possible given the increased likelihood of more research studies, not necessarily just clinical studies. And we do reach out on a regular basis to validate the information that individuals put in it. So if you join, you'll have an opportunity to tell us about your diagnosis, and we'll maintain that with you as well. So that's a little plug for the Mito Foundation Mito Registry. So we've also seen a few examples of really kind of multinational global collaborations in the space of research that have had some really promising outcomes. Is there anything that you're seeing that you think has promise?
I did touch on the Leigh disease registry that was discussed at the Mito Foundation, the Mito meeting, the Aussie meeting. I think that's a really great example of multinational cooperation to start a big natural history study for patients with Leigh disease. I think it's a good example of that. This can work and this can happen. It needs a bit of backing, needs someone to run it and be centralized, but it shows that it can actually happen. In terms of global initiatives, there's no doubt that a lot of these clinical trials, when they come to phase 3, which is where you want to show the medication is efficacious in your disease, you're going to have to get big numbers. And so, as we know, individual patient clusters, patients within Mito, are actually quite small, apart from your MELAS 3243 ADG, which I mentioned earlier on. You might have 1 or 2 patients with these particular changes in a particular gene. So if you've got a therapy that targets that, it's going to have to be a multi-centered study across the world, and that's where the companies come in and coordinate all of that. But that's where those big collaborations through those multi-center studies come about. A lot of investigator-led studies where the investigator, like a local one, decides on a trial therapeutic X in a patient, for them to run something like that becomes really cost prohibitive. So it ends up just doing it quite locally. There's no reason, I guess, with the hope of Mito Foundation, that we could run some studies like that on low-cost therapeutics. A lot of the kind of vitamins and other cofactors that we give in Mito, we could do something that's national, but again, it would require a bit of coordination, someone to take the lead. So I think at the moment, in terms of the clinicians, a lot of us are just so busy running our clinics and looking after patients that we don't have a lot of spare time to do that. But it's good to see there are a few clusters of people around the country able to do work in some of these areas.
Thank you. And sometimes we've heard these terms around personalized and precision medicine, and you talked about gene therapy earlier. What do you think that those types of advancements, what impact do you think they might have on treatment?
Really good question. I think there's been a lot of what we call N=1 therapies that have come about. And a lot of those therapies where, what I mean by N=1, a therapy made for a particular patient with a particular change in a gene. And it's come about through these antisense oligonucleotides, ASOs. So it's a kind of therapy that they use for spinal muscular atrophy and other things, where you target a short fragment, you get a short fragment of DNA that targets a particular mutation to either down-regulate or up-regulate it or do other things to it. And so you can make these really targeted little small bits of DNA that can up-regulate, down-regulate, or change a particular gene. And it's very specific to a mutation or a change in that gene. So what we could see, and we're already seeing it in a few situations where you've got a lot of these what we call N=1 studies, where you've got a change in a gene, we want to stop that gene from working so the other one can work properly or change the way it works. They develop a antisense oligonucleotide that's specific for that patient, and they give it to that patient and to see if that's going to work or not. And so already there have been a number of these N=1 studies where they've done that, and there are companies that are setting themselves up to develop some of these antisense oligonucleotides to be used therapeutically in that way. So that's when I hear precision medicine and I hear about that, that's what I think about what might be the case in the future. But it's not commercialized by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of these are very, very, someone who knows someone who can get you that, or you've got some collaborations with other researchers around, or another particular company can do that for you. But it would be great to see that type of, approach commercialized somewhere, somehow. It will happen, I'm sure, once costs come down, but that would be like amazing if we could, you just come along with your change in your phyto gene and we can then target something that does that. I guess the precision biotherapeutics thing, targeting the MELAS mutation now, but if they can get that to work for MELAS, there's no reason they couldn't get it to work for other mitochondrial DNA changes. So you can see how that can then open it up. So then they can make it easier if they get some runs on the board with something relatively common like MELAS, then it might open up to other ones down the track where you can then shift the heteroplasmy and maybe improve the outcomes. But, there's a lot of ifs there, but, you can see where that technology may potentially go and where it might take us. Yeah.
It certainly sounds very exciting. And any thoughts on timeframes that you would expect?
Oh my God, I think we've learnt over the years not to put timeframes on things.
It's tricky.
Precision medicine. I mean, people got very excited about CRISPR and gene editing and things like that. That's still a good way off, and we're still struggling with just garden variety gene therapy using regular vectors and trying to get that to work. And I would say 5 to 10 years would be my guess. But I love being proven wrong about these things. So even though I might say that, but I think people need to be aware of what the clinical trial timeframe generally looks like. And when a study gets to a phase 3 study, which is the really important phase, those studies in and of themselves can take between 2 to 3 years from start to finish. Most of the studies will have their kind of the active phase of the study where they're actually treating patients will be about 12 months for the patients, usually around between 42 to 52 weeks. Patients will be treated to show a benefit, and then patients are recruited over a 6-month period. So then there's another 6 months at the end of that, and then get the data together, get it put to the FDA. Then you're talking another 2 or 3 years. Then it get another year or so. By that stage, you're out to 3 years, and then to get it approved by the FDA or whoever, it's probably another 6 to 12 months. Although there's lots of work happening in that space in terms of getting those approvals through a lot more quickly. And so that when companies go for clinical trials, they've got almost an arrangement with the FDA that will almost approve it based upon if they reach this outcome. So there's a lot of work that happens there to make those things happen a bit more quickly.
And another area, you talked about the MELAS one that was showcased as part of the clinical day. But another area that we're seeing quite a lot of new research and trials is around the eye. And vision loss is a fairly common symptom in multiple forms of MIDO, including LON, which you mentioned earlier. What can you tell us about why the eye is a target of research at the moment?
Well, I guess a couple of reasons. I mean, the eye is, number one, it's a very accessible organ as opposed to the brain, which is stuck in a big bony casing called the skull, and also protected by this thing called the blood-brain barrier as well. The neurons in the back of the eye, relatively speaking, compared to the brain, are very accessible to us to deliver either gene therapy or other therapies too. So I think that's why a lot of researchers have targeted the eye, not only because it's an important symptom in mito disease, but also its accessibility. And through the eye, you've also got a little bit of a freeway back to the back of the brain as well. So sometimes people will kind of theorize if they can target a gene therapy to the eye, it might actually even get further back into the brain that way. So that's probably why a kind of a simple explanation as to why a lot of people are targeting it. LHON, of course, they have to target it because that's the main organ that's being involved in LHON. But for other mito diseases and some of the new therapeutics, they've actually just gone specifically for eye drops or similar type of approaches. But I think it's that accessibility of the eye and that, like, it's not really places on the body where you've got the nerves so close to the surface and so accessible to therapies. Does that kind of answer the question, I think?
Thank you. Yes,
yeah.
I think it's really interesting that we're seeing so much in that and how it might be applicable to, if we can get it really impactful in the eye, what else might come?
Yeah, well, I mean, people use it as a proof of concept. If they show that we can do that and we can deliver it to the eye, maybe if we can deliver it to the brain a bit better, that might actually so it gives people confidence to go, okay, let's do something, let's try and get that therapy into the brain then. Try and get it past this thing called the blood-brain barrier, which blocks a lot of therapeutics from getting through to it. And it gives you, there's ways of doing that, of course. And if you can show that it works on something like the eye, it gives you hope that it might work on something like, cells to do with your memory or movement or other things in your brain.
Right, thank you. We've got a couple of questions from participants. So one of the questions that came through was around acknowledging that many forms of mito are very rare.
Yeah.
And so what options or what would you recommend for families who want to advocate to be part of some kind of research for a very specific type of mito?
That's a very tough question, isn't it? Yeah. I think the best way probably is through your clinician. One of the best ways is probably through your clinician, because your clinician will have read the literature, will have been able to, knows where all the centers are. You can go and look at literature yourself. It can be a bit of a difficult process to go through to find these articles on your particular gene or whatever. But you'll see as part of that you'll see the authors, and the authors will have a corresponding email address. There's no reason you can't email them. The chance of getting a response back might be quite small, but usually the people that publish have got either a big cohort of patients or have a specific interest in that particular gene. And so, reaching out to them, don't feel shy about doing it. Reaching out to them might be the first step in, getting your patient, yourself or your child, involved in maybe something they're thinking about doing therapeutically. And I guess, being part of a registry is the other part of that, whether that might be a registry that they've got themselves that they're running, trying to collect all the number of patients around the world. And sometimes it might be only a handful of patients in the world with your particular change in your particular gene. And so I think there's a couple of avenues, like I said, through your own doctor, seeing if they can contact these other people, and because they're more likely to respond to an email from your clinician than from you. But also don't feel shy about contacting them directly. Sometimes the leads researchers love to hear from families that have got these diseases and love to hear more about it. And then they can come back to your doctor and say, oh, would you mind filling out this kind of registry or sheet with just to specify things, and then you just have to go through the consent process, and it's relatively straightforward. And then you can start to contribute your data to maybe a kind of really specific registry for that particular gene. Those are a couple of ways. In terms of it kind of advocating nationally and internationally, it gets really hard. I think supporting those bench researchers in what they're doing is the best way. And so whether encouraging them to go for grants, because Mito Foundation have grants here in Australia that they give out to people all over the world, encouraging them to say, look, did you know there's a Mito Foundation research grant that you could probably apply for? They might not be aware of that. I'm sure they're aware of the ones in their local countries or nearby countries that they can usually access. So yeah, so those are kind of I'm trying to think on my feet here a bit, but those are some of the ways that you as a family or a parent or a person with Mito could kind of advocate.
Thank you. And I agree about promoting the research funding. We are trying to take a more international approach and have had some success in that space. So yes, happy for anyone to share that far and wide. Also, we've had, it's definitely quite specific, but we have had inquiries come through our helpline, which we've then engaged our research manager on, and they may have some contacts, or they may have some thoughts about how to progress contact around a particular type of Mito or a particular type of study. So that's another avenue I encourage people to take, or at least ask the question, and we can see what we can do. We've had a question come through. What are you seeing AI do in research? What role is it playing?
AI. Oh, look, I guess for me, in terms of research, look, I'm not a bench researcher, so I can't say how AI would be impacting me. But I think what AI is good at, and what it will be good at, is some of the diagnostic stuff and trying to filter through variants and things in the future. We've got these pipelines that do that. I think AI is great for looking at drug targets and also looking at drug libraries and comparing them and going through things. So trying to find a particular compound that's going to bind to your particular mutated protein or bit of DNA or something like that. That's where AI is going to have the biggest impact, I think. And that's where those big therapeutic companies are really using it and trying to leverage it to go through libraries of thousands of different compounds and trying to sometimes creating a new compound from scratch, or what might be predicted to affect something. That's, I think, where AI is going to probably having its biggest impact in the research field. Just in terms of the clinical side of things, I think, what AI is going to be good at is matching lists of symptoms with diseases at times in hopefully a kind of intelligent way. It can make our job a little bit easier, I think, medically. As a clinician, I found it quite helpful if I've got a new change in a gene and I don't have the time to sit down and go through all the literature. A couple of the new AI platforms can do that for you very quickly without me having to sit down and go through 5 articles looking at the clinical picture of all these different ones. They can actually go through and do that. And I've tested it out a few times by doing it myself and then having the AI do the search for me. And it's been pretty good, actually. The one I've been using is Open Evidence, which has been not ChatGPT, but it's on specifically that's designed for looking through journal articles and things. So it's been helpful, and it just saved me a bit of time. I would have found the information eventually anyway. It's not like it created new information, but it just helped me kind of get to that information more quickly, which means that I've got more time to spend on looking after patients rather than searching through literature. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There's some really good, I think what we call use cases of AI in clinical work and research, and certainly and I'm absolutely no expert, but I've heard around the role of machine learning and the speed in which processes such as diagnostics can be done compared to the manual processes we've had in the past is just amazing. And you're right, the synthesizing of big data into something really meaningful. So thank you. So hopefully we've sparked some interest in people on the call in being involved in research. And you touched on a few things earlier when we talked around clinical trials and being trial ready as an individual. I'd like to delve into that a little bit more. And what can individuals do and what can they expect? You mentioned things like non-disclosure agreements. Like, it sounds maybe a bit daunting. What can somebody who might want to go into a clinical trial just want to be aware of?
Okay. I mean, I think there was a question up that's come up there was about non-disclosure agreements. So non-disclosure agreements are usually between us as the clinician who's going to run a study, or between anyone and the company. And it's usually with them sharing a lot of their preclinical work about a particular therapy. So they'll go through the mechanism of action, what studies they've done in mice and other animals, and what evidence they've got to show that this actually works. And so we like to see that so that we know that we're not going to put patients through a trial that doesn't look like, at least from our perspective, it's going to work. So it's really helpful for us to see that data. A lot of that stuff has been done very privately within the company, in the development phase. And the development phases, cost millions of dollars to do, and they put a lot of work into getting that data together. And so they don't want that out in the open. That's why they have a non-disclosure agreement, so that you can have a look at it as the clinician to see whether, does this look like it's got legs? Does this look like it's going to work? And then you can decide, okay, if I think it does, let's have a look at the protocol. Is this something that's acceptable to patients? Do we think that's reasonable? Do you think it's actually going to show or have a positive, show the results that they're looking to show? They've usually, generally speaking, they've done their homework very, very well, and they've designed the studies well. Occasionally we get the study and we go, oh, we should have included this, this, and this. We go, yeah, we did think about that, but we decided not to because it will cost too much. But usually by the time they come to us, the studies are all pretty much already well established. So it means that I can't put a slide up of the preclinical data. I can usually, if I have to want to say something, I have to say to them, look, do you mind if I just mention something about your preclinical data? Are there any slides that you can give me that you're happy for me to use? Yeah, that's fine. They'll let you do that. Anything that's been published in the literature is free game. So most of the times there might be something very, very early on in that process of development of that drug where there might have been an article or two by a researcher in a university somewhere that was then picked up by one of these companies and then used. So sometimes you can go back to those studies that have been published, that have been out in the literature. And sometimes the companies will present some data suggesting this therapy is going to work. And so you pick up on that and look at that as well. It does make sharing information difficult, but it doesn't. I think, companies, they need to make a profit from the therapeutics that they're developing. And a lot of this stuff is very proprietary. They've developed it in-house. And so it doesn't really interfere, because we still get to see, as the clinicians, what they're thinking about, and we'll distill that to you guys as the patients in the studies, so you've got an idea of what the therapy does and what it looks like, and they'll release some of the preclinical information in your information sheet. So when you go for a study, there'll be a patient information consent form, and within that information consent form is a lot of information about some of the preclinical work that they've done, or if they've done other studies in humans, what the results have been, what the side effects have been, what we expect was going to happen, that type of thing. So it doesn't make the study unsafe, the NDAs. I think it just protects the companies. But when it comes to safety in studies, it's our responsibilities as the investigators, the clinical investigators running the studies, and it's our number one responsibility, actually, is your safety through the trials. And I've drilled that into anyone who's been involved in clinical trials, is patient safety is number one. I don't care about the company. If the patient safety is even compromised, then we'll have to stand up and say that. So in terms of clinical trial process, the investigator and the investigating team, their number one thing is your safety and your well-being. And then secondly is making sure we run the protocol properly. So we need to follow protocol to the T, but patient safety trumps that every single time. So if there's any safety signals that come up, we're the first ones to tell the company, no, this is unsafe. This is what's happening. This is what we're seeing, and that's what our job is really. And so if you're going into clinical trial, then you know your clinical trial team will be looking after you every step of the way.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. I think for anyone who hasn't been involved in something like that, it possibly could be daunting, but it sounds like there's a very rigorous and supported approach taken. So thank you. I'm going to just do a call out for any last question, probably one. And also just remind everybody, if you've got any other questions that you want to pose after this, please send them through to you can do it via our helpline, and we'll come back to as many as possible. And you can reach out to us anytime for any question about Mito and your getting support and access. We have our helpline, we have our Pathways Telehealth Nurse Service, which is around health navigation, and we also have an NDIS navigator for some of the NDIS challenges. So I encourage anyone on the call today to reach out to find out more about those services. Curly's also going to put the poll back on your chat, so please take a few moments to tell us what you think about this event and those 4 questions. And I'm just going to check if any other questions have come through. Doesn't look like it. Any closing remarks, Drago, around the research landscape?
I think I kind of touched on a little bit at the start that, you know, I think it's very easy to become pessimistic about Mito research if you look at all the stuff that's happened and that hasn't come to fruition. But like I said earlier on, it is so encouraging to see companies still giving it a go and still getting out there and working towards developing therapies for patients. And, you know, whilst a lot of time you might think it's a financial thing, it's not so much. Some of the companies are quite altruistic about wanting to help patients. And certainly the people working at the coalface in the company are very much like that. So look, I think don't be discouraged by the lack of success we've had with clinical trials in Mito over the last kind of decade or so. I think we're coming to hopefully a time where we're going to start seeing some trials have some successes and have some big impacts on patient care. And it could come very quickly. It could be the next therapy around the corner. It could have a big impact, but mind you, if that comes, it's still going to be another 2 or 3 years before it really kind of hits the mainstream. So just to be aware of that. I think the other thing we talked about a lot is the registries, getting your name there, and making sure your doctors are aware that, you know, you're keen to be involved with the trials as well, and just say, look, if there's anything coming up, please let me know, and just bring that up at each of your consultations with your doctors. If they don't know, then see if they can put you in touch with someone who might have their finger closer to the pulse.
Excellent, thank you. And Carolee's just added the link to the Mito registry, for Mito Foundation's registry. So if you haven't joined, now's your chance. Thank you very much, Drago. You've covered a lot of ground, and I think certainly with what you've said today, and also what I heard as part of AussieMIT and also our Mito Community Summit, where we had some of the researchers speak, is that there is a lot going on, and it is promising. And yes, we have to be realistic about timeframes and who it might be relevant for. But because there is a lot happening, there is optimism around what's coming. And even in the instances where a particular trial hasn't been successful, there's an opportunity to repurpose. Maybe that I think you might have mentioned something around that too. Is that you? We're going to keep the people that are involved are very focused on outcomes, and they'll keep trying, and that gives me hope for the future of Mito diagnosis, management, and treatment. Well, thank you very much, Drago. I don't think any more questions have come through, so I think we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate your time and your sharing so generously your expertise. We really value your time today.
No problems, Tony. Thank you very much for being a great host, and keeping me on track when I kind of drift off in different directions. But yes, thank you very much. And we're really happy to be here and offer some information and advice to people. So yeah,